Hello and welcome to Listening to the Radio.
We're embarking on a really fascinating journey today. We're tuning into the story of a specific piece of audio history, the Riga-103 radio receiver.
That's right.
You, our listener, sent over just a fantastic collection of information, and our mission really is to weave it all together.
Yeah, try and make sense of it all.
Exactly. We want to uncover its beginnings, explore the technical details, and even trace its path through different owners and, where it stands today in the vintage electronics world.
Yeah, and you've given us a great set of sources to work with. We've got specs and history from radiomuseum.org about the different Riga-103 models.
Okay.
Service manuals, details from Electrotanya for the real tech heads.
Right.
An eBay listing giving us a price point. Etsy showing the broader vintage scene, and then insights from some Russian vintage electronics websites, too.
Okay, so quite a mix. Let's unpack this then. For you, our listener, especially if you're keen to learn, we're not just going to rattle off facts.
No, definitely not.
We want to try and connect the technical stuff with the human stories behind this radio, get a glimpse into Soviet-era electronics, the whole collecting scene, and the dedication involved in bringing these old devices back to life.
Absolutely. It's about the context as much as the object.
Right. So let's start at the beginning. Where did this Riga-103 actually come from?
Well, it originated in Riga, Latvia. Back then, of course, Latvia was part of the USSR.
Okay.
And it was developed by the Popov Riga radio plant. That manufacturer later became Radiotechnica RR.
Oh, Radiotechnica. Yeah, I've heard that name. They made quite a bit of audio gear, didn't they?
They did. They were a pretty big name. So this wasn't some small workshop project.
Got it.
The first designs for the 103 were ready, and they were preparing for launch around November 1967.
1967, okay.
And this was quite a big deal because it was marketed as a first-class portable transistor radio.
First class. What did that signify back then? Like top of the line?
Pretty much, yeah. For a portable transistor radio, first class meant it had, superior quality, better features compared to the lower classes.
Okay.
It really represented an advance in combining decent performance with portability, which was still relatively new then.
A first class portable in the late 60s. Yeah. Yeah, that must have been quite desirable. So technically, what was under the hood? What made it first class?
Right. Well, looking at the specs, especially comparing this 50 years USSR model and the export version, they shared a core design, 17 transistors.
17? Okay.
And they used the superheterodyne principle.
Superheterodyne. That's pretty standard for getting good reception, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It was, and still is, a really effective way to receive radio signals clearly. Basically, it converts all incoming frequencies to a standard intermediate frequency, which makes amplification and filtering much easier.
Ah, okay. Makes sense. What about the bands it could pick up?
Both covered the main bands, so broadcast, which is AM, and long wave. But then they also had more than 2 XW shortwave bands.
Oh, multiple shortwave bands. So good for international listening.
Exactly. That gave listeners access to a much wider range of global broadcasts. And of course, they both had FM.
Right.
Although the 50 years USSR model specifically mentions the OIRP FM band.
OIRT.
Yeah, that was the standard used in Eastern Europe and the USSR. It operated from 65.8 to 73 millihertz.
Oh, so different from the FM band most people use today, like 88 to 108 millihertz.
Exactly, a lower frequency range. The export model listed VHF FM with a similar OIRT range, 65.8 to 73.0 millihertz. So that wide range, especially the shortwave, kind of reflects the Soviet interest in both domestic reach and international broadcasting during that Cold War period.
Interesting. So you could tune into local stuff or try and pick up signals from, anywhere. How were they powered? Were they truly portable?
They were designed for portability, yeah. Primary power was batteries, a lot of them actually, 8 1.5-volt batteries.
8, wow, so 12 volts total.
That's right. But they weren't just battery powered. Both versions also had a power jack, so you could plug them in.
Okay, that's useful.
And the export model specifically notes dry batteries, which was just the standard term for the disposable batteries you'd use.
Makes sense. And the sound. What about the speaker?
Both models used a permanent magnet dynamic loudspeaker, PDI, with a moving coil, pretty standard, reliable speaker type for the era, capable of decent sound for a portable device.
Okay, so the guts were pretty similar. What about the outside? The look and feel? Did they differ there?
They did, somewhat. The sources say the 50 years USSR model specifically had a wooden case.
Oh, wood. That sounds quite nice. A bit more classic.
Yeah, probably gave it a more premium feel, maybe more traditional for the domestic market. The export model, though, just says various materials.
Various materials. So maybe plastic or maybe different finishes depending on where it was being sold.
Could be, yeah. Suggests a bit more flexibility for the export markets.
And were they genuinely easy to carry around? What about size and weight?
The dimensions listed are the same for both. 350 by 215 by 115 millimeters, so about 35 centimeter wide.
Okay, not tiny then. More like a hefty lunchbox size.
Maybe a bit bigger even. Definitely portable, but not pocket-sized. And the weight for the export model is listed as 5.8 kilograms.
Whoa, 5.8 kilos. That's nearly 13 pounds.
Exactly. So you could carry it, but it was a solid piece of kit. You weren't exactly jogging with it.
No kidding. Almost 6 kilos. Okay, you mentioned the export model had extra features, which makes sense given the heft, maybe.
Right.
What were they?
It did, yeah. It was definitely kitted out for an international audience. Firstly, all the labels were in English using Latin letters.
Right, essential for export.
Then it had an extra shortwave band, SW3, covering 3.95 to 5.75 millihertz. So even more international listening potential.
Okay.
And it had a whole bunch of connection options on the back. Terminals for an external antenna and an earth connection.
Good for improving reception.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Also a VHF dipole connector, specifically for better FM reception. Then DA jacks, you run DA-lings.
Oh, yeah, those round multi-pin connectors, common in Europe.
Exactly. DA jacks for connecting a pickup, like a record player, and a tape recorder.
So you could play records or tapes through it or record from the radio?
Presumably, yeah.
Yeah. Also an earphone jack for private listening, an external 12-volt power input, and even a connector for an external speaker. Wow, it really was designed as a sort of audio hub.
It seems so. And finally, it had VHF, AFC, automatic frequency control.
AFC, right. That helps lock onto FM stations, stops them drifting.
Precisely. Keeps the tuning stable, especially useful for FM. And it also had a local button.
Local button, what would that do?
Probably reduce the sensitivity slightly to prevent really strong local stations from overwhelming the receiver when you are trying to tune into weaker, more distant ones.
Ah, okay. That makes sense. So the export version was seriously feature-packed compared to the implied baseline. It's really interesting how they adapted it. Now, the Riga-103 itself, it didn't just stay static, did it? It evolved.
That's right. The original 103 apparently had a few minor design tweaks early on. Then in 1971, it was officially upgraded to the Riga-103-1.
The Gash one.
And then just a year later, 1972, came the Riga-103-2.
So quick iterations. Were these major changes?
Not really, according to the sources. The fundamental electrical design, the circuitry, stayed largely the same. The main differences were apparently cosmetic.
Ah, so changes to the case design, maybe? The look of the tuning dial, the knobs, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Subtle visual updates rather than a complete overhaul, which, makes sense from a production standpoint. Keep the core, tweak the appearance.
Yeah, common practice.
Yeah.
Now, one version that really stood out from the sources was that 50 years USSR edition. What was the story there?
Right. This was a special anniversary model made for the domestic Soviet market. It was to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the USSR.
Okay, 50 years. Now, the Radio Museum info mentioned 1917, 1967, but there was some discussion suggesting that wasn't quite right.
Yeah, exactly. A forum discussion pointed out, quite logically, that the USSR was actually founded in December 1922. So the 50th anniversary would have been in 1972.
Ah, 1972. Yeah. That lines up perfectly with the Riga-103-2 model coming out that year.
It does, and the forum post suggests this anniversary model was actually based on the chassis of the 103-2.
Okay, so it was the 72 model in special clothes, basically.
Seems like it, and here's where it gets even more interesting. That same forum post suggests the 50 years USSR radio was a limited edition, and possibly even given as gifts to deputies of the Soviet Supreme Council.
Wow, really? Gifts for high-ranking officials. That makes it quite a historically significant item.
Absolutely. A real piece of political memorabilia, potentially.
And there's a specific story about one of these radios, isn't there? With a serial number and everything?
Yes, quite a detailed account. A particular radio, serial number 3075-1, apparently belonged to Dr. Mario Neves.
Okay.
He was the very first Portuguese ambassador to the USSR, appointed in 1975.
The first Portuguese ambassador.
Wow. And according to this forum post, this specific 50 years USSR radio was given to him as a gift by the USSR Ministry for Foreign Affairs.
A diplomatic gift. That's amazing provenance for a radio.
Isn't that just? Really adds a layer to its history.
What happened to it? Did it stay with him?
Well, he apparently kept it for many years, even after he left the USSR and returned to Portugal. After he passed away, much of his estate went to public institutions, but This radio was eventually sold.
Sold.
Yes. Apparently, his grandson even tried selling it on eBay at one point, though it seems it was ultimately bought through a local Portuguese website.
That's incredible, being able to trace the journey of one specific radio like that.
It really is. From a factory in Soviet Latvia, potentially to a high-ranking official, then a diplomatic gift to an ambassador, and eventually ending up on the collector's market. It really brings the whole story to life.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Now, we know it wasn't just sold inside the Soviet Union. You mentioned export models.
Wow.
Did they go far?
They did. The Russian vintage sites and general descriptions mention exports to several countries. And interestingly, they weren't always sold as Riga.
Oh, rebranded.
Yeah, sometimes they appeared under names like Astrad or Solar in different markets.
Astrad Solar. Interesting, giving it a more maybe Western-sounding name.
Possibly, yeah. A bit of marketing strategy there.
And presumably they adjusted the radio itself for those markets.
They had to, yes. Especially the frequency bands. Export models often had different HF shortwave and VHF FM band coverage to match the broadcasting standards in the countries they were being sold in.
Right, like using the standard Western FM band instead of OIT, perhaps.
Exactly. Adaptability was key if they wanted to sell internationally.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, all this talk of old radios, it inevitably brings up the question of restoration, keeping them going. We had that YouTube video source showing someone restoring an old Philips radio.
Right, a 1938 Philips valve radio, a bit different from the transistor Riga, but the restoration process highlights a lot of common challenges.
What kind of challenges did the restorer face? I imagine it's not straightforward.
No, definitely not. One of the biggest things emphasized was safety. These old devices, especially valve radios, work with seriously high voltages.
Yeah, lethal voltages, potentially?
Absolutely. Big risk of electric shock if you don't know exactly what you're doing and take precautions.
So, rule number 1, be careful. What else? Parts must be an issue.
Huge issue. Finding replacement parts is often a major hurdle. For valve radios, specific vacuum tubes, especially things like the magic eye tuning indicator.
Oh yeah, those glowing green displays.
Exactly. Those can be really hard to find and expensive when you do. Even for a transistor radio like the Riga, finding the exact original transistors or other specific components might be impossible now.
So you end up having to find equivalents or scavenge from other units.
Often, yeah. It becomes a real hunt. Part detective work, part electronic skill.
And the components themselves, they don't last forever, do they?
No, that's another big thing. Components degrade. The video showed capacitors leaking their electrolyte.
Messy, and they stop working right.
Right. Wiring insulation becomes brittle and cracks. Things get dirty, corroded. Sometimes you even have to recreate cosmetic parts, like the print on the tuning dial if it's faded away.
Wow. And the restorer mentions specific safety tools.
Yes, things like using a series lamp tester, which limits current, and an isolation transformer, which isolates the device from the mains ground, both crucial for reducing shock risk.
Right. Safety first. What about the actual fixing? Any interesting troubleshooting examples?
In that Philips radio, the valve filaments were wired in series.
Like old Christmas tree lights. One goes out, they all go out.
Exactly the same principle. So if one valve's filament broke, none of them would light up and the radio would be dead. Tracking that down requires understanding the circuit.
Okay.
Then there's replacing the faulty components capacitors, resistors that have drifted off value. And after the basic repairs, there's the alignment process.
Alignment, what does that involve?
It's basically fine-tuning the radio's internal circuits to work together optimally, adjusting the intermediate frequency channel, tuning the oscillator coil trimmer, the antenna coil capacitor. It's all about getting the sharpest tuning and best sensitivity.
Sounds very fiddly. Needs patience and the right equipment, I imagine.
Definitely. And the video also mentioned that older radios are often more susceptible to modern electrical noise from phone chargers, TVs, Wi-Fi routers.
Yeah, all the interference we have now.
Oh, right. So they often perform much better with a good external antenna and a proper ground connection.
But despite all the challenges, there's a reward.
Oh, absolutely. The restorer really conveyed that emotional connection, the satisfaction of bringing this piece of history back to life, and then actually hearing broadcasts, maybe from far away, on this machine from decades ago. It's a tangible link to the past.
Yeah, I can see the appeal. It's more than just fixing an appliance. So, bringing it back to the Riga-103 today, what's the market like for them? Can you still find them?
You definitely can. We saw that eBay listing a working Riga-103 shipped from Ukraine, asking price US $429.
$429, wow. That's not insignificant for a vintage radio. Suggests there's real collector interest.
It really does. And looking at Etsy, while maybe not flooded with 103 specifically, you see lots of other Riga-branded radios.
Like the Selga, Abava you mentioned, and VEF.
Exactly. Other models from Radio Technica in Riga. Prices on Etsy vary a lot, some cheaper finds, but restored or rare ones can go for hundreds of euros. There's clearly a market for Soviet-era radios in general.
And it's not always about strict originality, is it? Some are being modified.
That's a really interesting trend. You see some listings on Etsy where they've taken a vintage radio like a Riga, kept the original case and look, but retrofitted modern internals.
Like adding Bluetooth.
Yeah, Bluetooth or Wi-Fi connectivity, so you get the cool vintage aesthetic, but you can stream Spotify through it.
Huh. Best of both worlds for some people, I guess. Blending old style with new tech.
It's definitely a thing.
And the fact that service manuals are available on sites like Electrotanya, that points to an active community, right? People are actually trying to fix these.
Absolutely. The availability of manuals, even with those stark warnings about electric shock for the inexperienced.
Right. Don't try this at home unless you know what you're doing.
Precisely. It shows there are people out there dedicated to repairing and maintaining these radios who value both the history and the technology inside of them.
So wrapping this up, the Riga-103, it's had quite a life, hasn't it? From its Soviet origins to the global market, and now as a collector's item.
It really has. It's a tangible piece of that Soviet electronics era, with all its different versions for home and abroad, and its journey, from the factory floor, maybe through diplomatic circles like the ambassador's story, to ending up potentially in a museum or on a restorer's bench today. It just highlights this enduring appeal.
Yeah.
And like we discussed with the restoration, getting involved with these radios connects you not just to the technical side, the engineering of the past, but also to the personal stories, the history wrapped up in the object itself.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Considering how this exported Riga-103 traveled the world and the passion people have for restoring these things, it makes you wonder what other, seemingly ordinary objects from the past might hold similar, rich, fascinating stories just waiting for someone to uncover them.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
Maybe the phones or laptops we use every single day. Maybe one day there'll be these historical artifacts sparking the same kind of curiosity and passion for future generations trying to understand our time.
It's entirely possible. History is everywhere, even in the technology we take for granted. Definitely something to ponder.